Hey everyone, this is Tracy Friedlander. You're listening to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. Today on the show, I have violinist and teacher Amy Beth Horton. I contacted Amy Beth after discovering the popular Instagram profile she has for her daughter Ava, who is a budding violin soloist at the age of 8. After reaching out and talking to Amy Beth, I learned she is herself an established violin soloist and teacher. On the show, she talks about how she carved a solo career path for herself from an early age, and she gives us a ton of valuable information about creating that career through the highs and lows of life, as well as details about the extraordinary teaching studio business she built for herself. Once she realized she had a budding child soloist, she suddenly found herself in the exact shoes of her studio parents, but with the unique point of view of a teacher, musician, and soloist. Listen and hear what she does with this valuable advantage, how she contributes to her audience and her new students and their parents with her latest venture. Also, a big thanks to Gabby Castro of the clarinet quartet Foreplay Clarinet. Gabby composed the new Crushing Classical theme music that you heard at the beginning of this episode. You can find out more about Gabby and what she does on Facebook and Instagram at Foreplay Clarinet, Fourplay Clarinet. Her handles are listed in the show notes. Before we start, I'd like to thank Fix Music for sponsoring Crushing Classical Podcast. Fix Music is your online resource for high-quality sheet music at great prices. There are some new offerings at Fix available that you'll want to know about. Now there's organ music, a large choral music selection, as well as orchestra parts that you would need for concerts and auditions. And now they are actively working with choral and orchestra directors to help plan seasons. So if you're a program director and you want some help on choosing pieces for your next season, contact Fix Music today through their website. And as always, free shipping on all domestic orders. Check out fixmusic.com for your sheet music needs and use the link in the show notes to receive 10% off your first order. Let's get started. Hey, Amy Beth, thanks for being on Crushing Classical.
Thanks for having me.
This is Amy Beth Horman. I found you on Instagram. I think lots of people have found your profile on Instagram because you've got an Instagram profile for your daughter Ava, who's an exceptionally amazing violinist at the age of 8. And it was so amazing to find your profile and the fact that you have, what do you have now? Over 20,000 followers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that happen? I mean, because I don't know if you were like, I need to grow my following, like how does it happen?
I really didn't ever think of it that way. I mean, I started it just with family pictures and with pictures of Ava. And, she's played violin since she was 4. So I started putting in pictures of her playing and little videos when she first started. And it quickly kind of grew into a more musical Instagram because that's the thing that she started to love the most. And, what I found was, I think last January we were at 5,000 followers, and that seemed ridiculous to me too, but I thought it was nice because I had met, a bunch of new people there, and it seemed like a warm environment to me overall, so it was fine. But one of my friends who does Instagram and does a lot of media stuff said, I bet you should, put more videos in of your process and like how you guys practice. And initially I thought, well, how we practice is pretty ludicrous sometimes because she at that point was, 7, and I wasn't sure whether anybody wanted to see these crazy games that I had to do with Ava so that we could laugh.
Did you make up the games?
Yeah, well, she does for the most part. So, because we do a lot of child-led learning, because I really believe in that. And so I mean, some of it gets really funny. And she said, no, I think, the fact that she's doing so well and, she's so young, I think people are interested. So I started posting like scales and arpeggios and funny things that we did to keep her happy and learning. And to my surprise, that just blew up. So for whatever reason, people were very interested in that. And my friend was right. And from there, it just grew and grew and grew. And I never did anything even after that, strategically. I just kind of post what we're doing every day. I try and post a little on Violin Breakfast every day, so that people know that we're, dedicated to this time together every day, and what it means to us, and also that we're having fun
So that's
and
what
doing
you just
things.
call Violin Breakfast, your morning practice session?
Yeah, that's what we do together before she goes to school. And I believe in that really strongly as her mom, but also as a teacher. I think it works really well to have the kids, doing a little bit of music and getting their brains tickling before they go off to school. So we've been doing this, for years now, and Ava named it Violin Breakfast. So it's just kind of stuck. And so we started just posting those things. And sometimes I'll post clips from rehearsal, or it's funny because I think other musical Instagrams, they're posting a lot of concerts. They're posting like final products.
Yeah.
And we do post that, but very rarely. And it's not because we don't have that. It's just that there's much more that goes in between.
And it's the
So
process that people actually want to see, I think.
I think that's why it's grown so far. So now we're at almost 24,000 followers,
Wow. And so what's
which
the handle then for everyone?
it's Ava Luhu. So
So
Ava.
why is it called Ava Luhu?
Because when she was little, she kind of reminded me of a Dr. Seuss character. So that's what we used to call her when she was running around the house. And it's just kind of her little nickname. But again, when I started it, it was more just for fun, and it still is for fun.
Yeah.
But it just seemed very small and kind of, like cutesy in the beginning. And so I named it that. And then it's occurred to me to rename it, but there's something, kind of sweet about just keeping that same name now.
Well,
Yeah.
the good thing about Instagram is you can change things and not lose, not lose the followers. You can always change it in the
That's
future
true.
when she's
Yes.
19 instead of 9, or I mean
Yeah, I'm
18
sure.
instead of 8. I keep saying she's 9 and she's 8 now.
I know.
So,
Who knows what she'll change it to when Instagram allows her to take over her own account, right?
yeah, well, I mean, and that's such a cool thing too, that in this day and age, it's so important, assuming that Instagram isn't going anywhere anytime soon, which I don't think it is. The fact that she has such a base of followers now is remarkable just for her career.
Well, I mean, again, it's not something that we set about doing. And I look at it now kind of almost like I'm on the outside of the situation, and I see what you're saying. But we weren't going for that. It just kind of has happened, and I'm grateful for it, because I do think you're right. I think eventually it might be a wonderful thing for her to have. And, at this point, it's offering me a lot of camaraderie with other parents, and it's connecting me with people like you. And, I think the truth is that when you're a musician and you're practicing, which is who I am, and then also
Yeah.
when you're parenting a young artist like her and you're practicing, which is what you have to do, it's isolating. It's a
Yep.
little bit like you're just in the house all the time. So having this connection with other people who feel like I do and who have those same struggles and feelings, it's a good thing for me. So we'll see what it ends up also offering her when she's old enough to, really take advantage of it.
Exactly. So you mentioned you're a musician, which I didn't realize when I first reached out to you. So tell me about your career, because I know you've had a really cool, interesting career.
Okay, so when I was, I think I was 3, I went to an NSO concert with my parents, and so they were they were very granola, my parents, and so they were like, "Yeah, let's take our 3-year-old to an NSO concert," which is brave, right? Because now that I have kids, I just can't believe that they risked that. But
So
they
that's
took
National
me.
Symphony?
Yes. And so I sat with them and watched a concert, which, again, as a parent now, I look back and think, what 3-year-old sits and watches an entire concert? But according to them, I sat there and watched it and was fascinated. And then because I was fascinated afterwards, and both my parents are musicians, so, it's not too surprising, but it's a little surprising how fascinated I was, because I was still and quiet. So they said, well, what, did you like it? And I said, yeah, I loved it. And they said, well, what did you think about it? And I looked at them and I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And they said, wow, you want to be in the National Symphony? And I said, no, I want to be the girl in the dress that plays the violin in front of the National Symphony. And I was 3. And
Wow.
they just looked at each other and they said, oh. And, both my parents were music ministers. And so they were both organists. My father's a composer. My mom was a painter also. So, they kind of, for them, that was a leap. They're like, wow. And apparently I asked and asked and asked to start violin after this National Symphony concert. And I became so persistent about it that I annoyed my mother a little bit because she didn't have any intention of starting me on the violin that early. And so what she did was she just sat me down and she said, hey, I know that you want to play the violin, and I understand that, but you're 3. So I don't really want to start you on an instrument until you're in kindergarten. So let's just take a step back and not talk about it for a while. So no more questions about violin lessons, because the answer will be no until the very first day of kindergarten. And then you can ask me again. And I was the type of kid that if you sat me down and really got at my level and told me something, I listened. So I did listen. And according to her, I did not ask after that because I knew I wasn't supposed to. And then she said on the very first day of kindergarten, I came back and I said, so when's my first violin lesson? So I was waiting. And she said she knew when I came and asked her, wow, this kid has been waiting. She followed what I asked her to do. And now she's on the very first day, just as I instructed, she's asking. So I'm definitely getting her violin lessons. So she got me violin lessons with a local Suzuki teacher from our area, which is the Washington, D.C. area. And her name's Patty Hurd, my very first violin teacher. And she's amazing. She was nurturing and kind and just a beautiful person, a wonderful violinist. And she had me in her studio until I was about 10, and then helped me transition to a more advanced instructor, was very supportive with that switch, helped me find the right person. And I started with Jody Gatwood, who's the former concertmaster of the National Philharmonic and a Juilliard grad. So I stayed with him. And then when I was about 15, decided that I wanted to study with Gerard Poulet, who I'd met at a summer festival in North Carolina. So I'd been in a master class of his, and I saw him play, and then I saw some of his students playing, and I just kind of fell in love with his bow arm and the way that he made sound. And I thought to myself, I really need to be full-time studying with this guy. And it just clicked in my mind that I really wanted to do this. So I started writing him, because of course this is way long ago, so no email, no nothing. So I was writing him letters and sending him, cassettes of me playing and the progress that I was making. And I eventually convinced him to consider teaching me at the Paris Conservatory. So I moved over there by myself when I was 16.
Wow.
And I quit school. My parents were fully on board with this, which still amazes me. And I think they just knew that I was the kind of kid that was just really driven and tunnel visioned about things. And that if I felt really strongly that this was the right move for me, and they trusted me. And, they sent me there, and I lived in a dormitory, which was for underage female musicians run by Dominican nuns. And
wow.
I know, right?
So
and,
that was gutsy to move over. I mean, your parents were like, okay, see ya when you're 16.
Well, I mean, I had a pretty good track record with them. I was always all about the violin.
Right. And you didn't care at that point. You weren't really into high school. Like, what about my friends? Because I know that's how I was a little bit in high school.
No, I just, I had some friends, but, I was already performing a lot at, 14, 15, 16s, competing a lot. So to me, this was just an extension of that. I wanted to continue my education. I had done an audition for Dorothy DeLay at Juilliard within that year, I think. And she had accepted me as a student, but I didn't feel strongly about that choice. And I had been writing Gerard Poulet for, over a year. And he was, being very communicative. And I thought, this is really where I want to be. So I'm going to pursue this. And it was definitely harder. I had AP French in me, but that means pretty much nothing when you get to Paris and have to converse with people. So, to say that it was harder than I thought, of course it was. It was a lot harder to adjust than I ever imagined that it would be. And yet, I was where I wanted to be, and I was studying with the person that I had, been dreaming of studying with. And I was lucky to have parents that were, willing to let me listen to my gut and trust myself, because I knew that what I needed for me to really be the artist that I wanted to be was in that man's teaching. I knew it. And even though, there were times, because I think when you study with big teachers like him, it can get very, very tense. And, he was very strict, and his way of teaching certainly had its low points and its high points. There was stress in being at the conservatory that young, but I never look at it and think anything except for this was exactly the right decision that I made. So I've never regretted any of that. And I'm so grateful that they allowed me to follow my gut.
That's amazing. So
Yeah.
then after that, you continued a solo career.
I did. So I stayed there for almost 4 years or so. And then when you're over there, because I got my first prize almost immediately when I got there. I played for the head of the conservatory and a couple of other people, and then they gave me that degree. And then I competed to get into the third cycle program, which is their last program at the conservatory. It's usually for people who are older, so I was very young to do that. And I got through that competition, and I actually scored first in that competition and got in and was there working to be a soloist. I mean, that's pretty much what that cycle, the third cycle, is about. And so I was there working with Mr. Poulet and did a lot of performing and was on TV and the radio and playing with orchestras. And then I came home because that time was, coming to a close. And I was in the middle of trying to figure out what my next leg of education might be, so I had actually met with a couple of teachers, had gone to New England Conservatory and had a lesson there. I was just kind of dabbling, like who could be the next mentor for me while I continue competing and performing, which I think a lot of people can relate to if they're, fresh out of conservatory. They're thinking, well, do I do an artist diploma now? Or I was trying to figure out my next move. And in the middle of that, my mother got very sick, and she was diagnosed with late stage ovarian cancer. So as soon as that happened, I put everything on hold. And then gradually within the next couple of months, I realized that I would have to cancel my concerts because it was a very volatile health situation, which nobody could have predicted. And, my mom and I were very close, kind of best friends anyhow. So there was no way I was going to be in another city. So
Right.
I was pretty much part-time, at least, living with her, if not full-time, when she was really sick, and taking her to appointments. And I was lucky to have a really beautiful support system of friends and family, but I didn't want to be anywhere else but with her. So that illness, normally will end quickly, so late stage, still, they haven't made many advancements since then. Usually they give a patient, 6 months to a year to live, but we were lucky because she was with us almost 5 years longer.
Wow.
And she did treatment at NIH. And somewhere in the midst of this, you're just so grateful because you feel like, wow, I've been granted more time with my own mother. And I knew that it was limited, but I didn't know how far. And because the treatments were experimental, you just weren't sure really how much time you were going to have. So you're trying to really get as much as you could out of that precious time. And I just could not really be performing in the midst of that because she would land very quickly in the hospital for certain things. And it just didn't allow for me to feel confident on stage or in rehearsals. So like I remember at some point in there, I received a phone call from the National Symphony asking me to play. And I said no. And it was hard. And I remember my mother being upset with me. But at the time I thought, I do want to play with the National Symphony, but I don't want to play with my heart in a different place, because that's not going to help my career.
Right.
And I don't want to have to cancel on them on the last minute, because that certainly won't help my career. So as much as she wanted to see me continue performing, the best thing for me was to be going in a different direction, at least right then. And with lots of, bills around and needing to, make ends meet, I started teaching. And inside that period of time, I really surprised myself, because I had taught a little bit in Paris, but mainly to make pocket money. And, found myself uh, at home with my mom teaching in the house where I grew up. And she taught the whole time I was growing up. And there was something just really beautiful and kind of nostalgic about it. And I realized, the impact that I was having.
Right.
And I just kind of fell in love with it. It caught me off guard, because I'd spent so much time on stage and pursuing this solo career. And, I absolutely admit that I started it because I thought, I need to bring in a little bit of money into the house. And so this is an easy way for me to do it, which is low pressure. And so I did it for that reason, starting, but then found myself just falling into it. And
that's great, because I think a lot
great.
of times people start teaching, myself included, I have to admit. You do it because it's a good way to make money. When you're a musician, you're like, well, what can I do? Well, I can teach, I guess. I don't know if I ever have. Like when you first start, and then you find either that you do like it or that you don't. And it's cool that you found out that you did like it.
Yeah, and I was so grateful for it, because, in a sense, it allowed me to still, connect with music and to be helping other people play and reach some of their dreams. I think it fulfilled me in a way. And had I not done that, it would have felt very different during that time. I would have felt really disconnected from music. So it kind of kept me in the game of making music and producing music without that added kind of pressure of being the person on stage and doing auditions or competitions and traveling. So in a lot of ways, I was grateful to fall into it in the way I did, and to be able to have enough presence of mind in what was kind of an emergency situation in my family. I was happy that I was able to still feel like, wow, I really love this. This is surprising and really great for everybody. So, that process took, I guess, or that period of time was probably 3 or 4 years. And then when my mom passed, there was a time where I thought, she would really want me to get back into performing. So I did compete again, and I did perform again, which was very difficult because I was, 24 or something now. So, and it isn't like I wasn't practicing during that whole time, but it was definitely a hole in my history. So, when you're calling different recital halls that you've worked with before when you were 15 or 16, 17, I don't know, somewhere in there, or conductors that you've played concerti with in the past, their first question is, where have you been?
Right.
And that was one that I had to answer really honestly, and just kind of hope and bank on the fact that, we're all human beings and things come up, and we have to be true to ourselves and to the people that we love. And while music is one of my first loves, it's not my only love, and it's not the only way I love, so I had to kind of be honest with them. And I was surprised because, they were very understanding, first of all, and they were interested still. Did they ask me to come and play for them to make sure that I was in shape? Yes. They're like, when can you meet with me, and what would you like to play? And, I had to kind of prove again, kind of start over. And luckily, I was willing to do that. And at the time, I was playing the Nielsen Violin Concerto because I loved it, which is a great reason to play a concerto. And I taught it to myself. And I remember one of the first conversations I had with a conductor because I was thinking I've got to get back on stage, so I have to be brave. So I'd called him, and he and I had never worked together. But I knew he was in the area, and I asked him if he would hear me play. And he sounded kind of mildly interested. He said, I think I remember your name. Where have you been? And we had that conversation. And he said, well, what are you working on right now? And it was kind of a casual question, like, it just kind of came out of his mouth. Well, what are you working on? And I said, well, and it was that moment where you think, well, I should probably say like Tchaikovsky or Beethoven or something, that people know of. But instead, I thought, no, I'm going to stick true to myself. I'm going to be honest. And so I said, well, to be honest, I'm playing the Nielsen Violin Concerto. And he said, have you spoken to somebody about me? And I said, I don't know what that means. What do you mean? And he said, so you're not aware of how I feel about Nielsen? And I said, no. And he said, you should do some research. And I said, on what? And he said, the people that you're talking to. And he said, it appears that you already have. And I said, no, I guess I should, but I haven't. And he said, well, you're talking to the biggest Nielsen fan ever.
You're like, it could either be this guy hates Nielsen
yes.
or he loves him.
I mean, it was like my heart was just beating out of my chest. And he said, so you're telling me that you can play the Nielsen Violin Concerto? And I said, yeah. He said, I've never seen anybody be able to do it. He said, it's very difficult. And I said, well, it is difficult, but it's helping me grieve right now. And that's where I am in my life. It helps me feel better. It has a myriad of emotions that I'm in the middle of feeling. So I enjoy playing it. And he said, can you play it for me next Wednesday? And I said, yes. And he said, in full? And I said, yes. And he said, do you have a pianist? And I said, I can get one. And then I met him that next Wednesday, played the whole thing, and he hired me on the spot. And from there were a bunch of other conductors in the area that came to that concert, and my solo career started again.
Wow.
And, I look back on that, and, you can replay like a different film in your head. It sounds like a movie. And another take on that movie would be me saying, well, I'm doing the Tchaikovsky right now, or I've been looking at the Beethoven, or,
right.
Just kind of going inward and not wanting to share with him really the truth of what I was going through. But instead, I chose to be true to myself. And in turn, it was almost like the universe rewarded me because I was speaking to a Nielsen fan and I was able to produce it for him. And the two of us became really, really close friends and supporters of one another's work after that. So it just led to a lot of great things, and it led to me performing again.
That's great. And it also says a lot for if you do want to be a soloist, to just make it happen yourself by calling conductors. You don't need to wait until you've won a big competition and then be asked to be represented by a big agency or something. Like, you can just go and make things happen by calling conductors.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. And, I look at that as it's pretty brave of me to have done that, but I had a good resume. I had played a lot with orchestra. I had won a lot of competitions. So it was possible for me to make that phone call on my own. It did make me feel vulnerable, but in the end, it led to exactly what I wanted it to. So, I remember my mother used to say to me all the time, you already have no. You're sitting with a no already. So you might as well call and see if you can change it into a yes.
That's true. It is no before you ask, because you won't be doing it. That's a good point.
Because he wasn't gonna call me on his own.
Right.
So, you have to be okay with the idea that he'll say, well, I'm sorry, but, please don't call me at home, and I don't know you, and I don't really want to meet with you. You have to bank on other musicians, professional musicians, understanding that there are people that are trying to put their art on stage and they need help in order to do so. And that they might very well be open to hearing you and willing to help you do that. And I kind of live on that assumption. And as naive as it might seem to other people, it worked really well for me. So I did many auditions like that. And you always have to go in and prove yourself, even when you have the referral and, somebody's already kind of helped you along. I've never had a situation where I haven't had to then go and still play for the conductor so that they can really feel comfortable with the decision of hiring you. And, certainly me being outgoing and being willing to put myself on the line, it's why I've been able to play with as many symphonies as I have, and it's developed me as an artist. I don't think that you can really understand the concertos unless you've performed them, not just once, but several times, so that you understand, the full fabric of them and what it feels like to produce it, and have had a few times where it didn't work out and a few times where it really did, so that you know what the difference is. So yeah, I'm grateful that that young girl in me was courageous enough to make some of those phone calls. And in the end, because I had those concerts that I garnished on my own, it got me management. So I was under management for about 5 years. And the only reason that I stopped was because my teaching career started blooming and I just didn't have as much time. And so I decided to make most of my performing more local, which were connections that I already had. So, but I think one of the reasons that she did sign me initially was because she saw that I was working.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And that I wasn't working with somebody once, but that I was coming back and working with them several times.
Yeah.
So she knew that I was building relationships and that I was doing that well, and that I was keeping contact with people and networking well. And then she was able to, to expand some of those connections, so that I worked, with different symphonies that were out of town that I would not have had access to, like the New Mexico Symphony or the Northwest Indiana Symphony, the places that were outside of my home area.
Mm-hmm. So are you still soloing now?
I haven't soloed with orchestra in California. So the last one that I did was in Virginia before I left. The fall before I left the East Coast, I played the Chord Gold with the Piedmont Symphony. And then when we found out that we were going to be moving, I actually kind of put all of that on hold, because I just wanted to take the time to get the family used to being on a new coast and in a new place.
Yeah, so let's talk about, I want to talk about your move, because that's a big deal, and especially why you moved and all of that, because, and what you were leaving behind, because now you've told us about your career and what you've built on the East Coast, and I know that you were in the process of building a studio at the same time. So let's complete the picture. Like, what did your studio, how did it develop in DC as you were creating your solo career? You're also simultaneously building the studio, right?
Yeah. And I think what happened was at first I was teaching, just a smaller group of kids, and, they were doing really well in things like all state auditions and, seated really high in their youth orchestra. And then a couple of them started winning more regional, more important competitions regionally. And then there was kind of the word started getting out that I was able to help with that. And then more students started coming my way. And it expanded things to the point where suddenly I realized that I was really gratified by teaching at the higher level, and also working with kids that were really talented and driven, and helping them kind of keep balance, and working with their parents and building them, really solid and artistically sound, so that they could do what they really wanted to do, which was to be on stage. And it was, I think when my solo career had started really working, and I was doing, I guess I was doing somewhere between 8 and 10 concertos a year, and then also a smattering of recitals, and still traveling a bit for that. I found myself with students that were mainly of the competitive variety, right? So they were very committed and devoted, and they had parents that were all in, totally devoted. And they were, anywhere from 7 or 8 years old into the last year of high school. And we worked together sometimes once or twice a week with a pianist very regularly. And the studio just started building. So by the time I left, we had kids that were 14, 15 that were in international competitions. One of them was at the Menuhin competition. They were traveling, competing, performing, playing with orchestra. It was a large operation kind of happening. And one of the things that I realized was that all of that is really wonderful because you're working with great talent is very thrilling and gratifying. It's also really challenging, but it means a lot to me. And I think that it's something that I'm really good at. But it started to get to the point where it was so large that I felt like I was kind of running a conservatory out of my house a little bit. And,
Wow.
I chose to do it at my home because I had, at the time, I was also having kids. So I wanted to be where I could see my kids grow and be able to go in and visit with them between lessons or between rehearsals. Um, and I started doing chamber music and running a little bit of that out of the house. We were doing musicals, which were like home recitals in the house once every month, and then holding 7 or 8 master classes a year uh, at a nearby church. So I was bringing in artists and lodging them and
Oh,
having
wow.
them do master classes for the kids and holding workshops of my own in the summer. It was wonderful, but it was a lot. And I
Well, you
realized that
created more than a studio. It's a business, really, right?
yeah, it was definitely business, and it was certainly a very well loved business, but it
Hmm.
was more than I could handle all by myself at times. And I think that it prevented me after a while of feeling like I could do my own concerts, so that balance was off. And then it also felt like I wasn't seeing my own kids enough. So I definitely was in the middle of kind of trying to rebalance. Like I got to a point where I had moved all of my lessons to certain days of the week and then had 2 or 3 days off to regroup. But I found that my health was starting to decline a little bit because I was getting sick more often. Like it was definitely in need of a shift.
Hmm.
And inside of those feelings, my husband got a job offer in California, and there were opportunities out here for him, which he had been kind of waiting for because he had been helping me grow my business. And I had, a friend that was already teaching at the San Francisco Conservatory, and he was urging me. He was like, eventually you could probably teach at the conservatory. It's much, much easier out here. And he was asking me to come out and visit, and I did. And then with the job offer on the table for my husband, we had to really sit down and think about what was best for our family balance, our kids, for me as an artist and, as a teacher, because I knew that I had more in me in both of those departments, but I needed to be able to access that. So if I was completely strung out and really, really exhausted at the end of every day, I was going to block myself from growing more as a teacher and also as a performer. So we decided to make that plunge. It was very, very hard. It took us a long time to make the decision. We had a lot of long nights. And it just seemed to line up with what was currently going on. And the other thing is that the housing market was in the right place for us to sell our house at that time. So there were a lot of things, kind of showing us, lining up where we thought, it is probably the right time to make a change, even though it's going to disappoint a lot of people, even though it's going to be very challenging. If my husband was going to make the right moves in his career, and if I was going to make new moves in mine and allow myself the opportunity to keep growing, we needed to relocate ourselves.
Right.
And so we did. And, I have to say, and if I had waited to do it, even 5 years or 10 years, I don't know that I would have had the personal strength to be that courageous.
Mm.
Even though I'm the same girl that moved by myself to Paris when I was still supposed to be in high school. So I know it's in me somewhere, but I think, life doesn't offer you lots of opportunities to reinvent. And we look back on those days now and, we realize how close we came to staying put because we were scared. And I'm so glad that we did what was right for us and for our family, because I don't know that I would have done it if we had waited.
It's different when you're older, isn't it? I mean, when
Yeah.
you're in high school, I remember some of the things I did that felt gutsy, when I was, when I was in college. Just deciding to transfer. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
staying here, I'm leaving, like
Yeah.
you don't it's just easier to do, I think, when you're younger. Or maybe you
I,
just, I don't know, you have more guts.
yeah, I totally agree because, you're even having now that I've been here for as long as we have, I feel like it was very difficult, to meet new friends, to really be vulnerable and have everything so new, all of our environments new, the school, the conservatory, Ava getting a new teacher because we decided that needed to happen at the same time. Um, you know, there were just a lot of new adjustments to make, and you find yourself exhausted at the end of every day. It does remind me of how I felt when I first moved to Paris. I was so tired at the end of every day. And I realized after a while it was because I was having to really work to stay authentic and in the moment.
Yep.
It was harder because everything was brand new. And, we got through that adjustment period with a lot of love and patience. And, we've found ourselves now on the other side of it and doing really well. So,
Isn't it
yeah,
interesting how when you look back on things like your trip to Paris, or, I mean, not trip, I mean, you were there for a long time, and then now your big move, often you don't go, most of the time you say, I'm really glad I did that, when it was something
Yeah.
scary that you were nervous about doing,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. And, it is important, I think, to look back because I can start to now pinpoint the feelings that I had and the exhaustion that I had
Yeah.
so that I can comfort myself and be like, well, this is what it feels like. I can say to myself, hey, Amy Beth, you're tired because, these are all new people. And, as outgoing as I am, I have kind of an introverted side. So to feel like you're on all day and having to kind of find your way is difficult when you're used to not having to do that. And I think the more you take risks and make those kinds of changes in your life, the more you understand what the feelings are that you have to associate with them so that you're not scared by those feelings and so that you don't back off, but that you kind of persist through that no, this is part of the packaging of reinventing.
Yeah. I heard somebody on a podcast say recently that you have to decipher the difference between actual risk and the feeling of something being risky versus like actually being risky,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. And
nothing's actually very risky about moving across the country. It feels risky, but it's not like life threatening, like
no, and I
once you
mean, when you
get
think
there.
about it's kind of an issue of privilege as well, because you think about, oh, this feels really risky. Well, we have a house and we have a
Right.
car and we have our health and we have money in the bank. And so really, how risky is it?
Right.
I have talent, which is portable. I have passion, which is portable. I have love in my heart. And there's no reason why I can't reinvent, but I have to be able to identify the feelings that I'm having as just being the trappings of reinventing and not a signal that I need to retreat. And
Exactly.
I do feel like it gets forgotten that people who succeed, it isn't that they didn't want to quit. They've wanted to quit a million times, but they just didn't. And, the thing that gets them over that hump is what we should be more fascinated with, not where they are right now, but how did they resist that urge? Because
Totally. That's
we
what
have
helps
the
people.
urge.
That's the only thing that helps people. It doesn't help people to find out how successful other people are by seeing the end result.
Yeah.
That's such a great point. So, how have you reinvented yourself now that you're on the West Coast?
Well, because I had some time off, I took 6 months to 9 months to just kind of be a mom again and to get to know the kids on a full-time level, which I hadn't had a chance to do. And they are 6 and 8 now. So especially with my youngest, I feel like we have, a really new relationship now because I have much more free time for me to be able to really have full conversations with her and not feel distracted
Yeah.
with a work email coming through or whatever. So I purposefully, took that time, which I know that not everybody has. And, again, I was working 50 to 60-hour weeks, and I know that a lot of people are doing exactly that. But I'm glad that I took that time because I know her more now. And it's kind of sad for me to even say those words. Of course, I knew her before, but she's growing up now. So I kind of understand more about her and what makes her tick and things that trouble her and things that excite her. So I'm able to be a better parent to her because I get a little bit more of what kind of kid she is. And Ava was, able to have me really help her transition to a new teacher and to a new school and conservatory. And I was so blessed to see her thrive and all of that last year because she just kind of really bloomed as a young artist and is still doing so. But it was kind of a breakout year for her last year. She really went from this little 7-year-old at the conservatory pre-college program to playing with orchestra 4 times last year. And just all of her dreams that she'd said that she wanted, some of them just started happening. And if I had been working during that time, I would have missed some of it. So, I was able to do that. And that was really crucial. And then after that, period was up. I did have, and I think we spoke about this, I had a meeting with the pre-college director to just let him know that I was also a teacher, and to give him my resume. And, initially it was to let him know that if he was looking for someone that I'm obviously in town, I live in the city, but also because I had spoken to, Ava's teacher and also my friend who works at the conservatory. They said, well, let them know in case they need somebody to sub for chamber training or, that way you're teaching a little bit while you're still adjusting to new life. And so I did that. And then I started hanging out with the parents because suddenly I'm a studio parent, which I'd never been really.
Right.
And
What was
hearing
that
all of
like?
them.
What was that like? Because now you're one of them instead of being, instead of knowing them through being a teacher, now you're part of their group.
I mean, it was really funny because I didn't think about that before I headed in. It did
Yeah.
not occur to me that that I was suddenly going to be a studio parent to other studio parents. So, and I'm an honest person. So if somebody said, "Well, what do you do for a living?" I always told them. But because I wasn't currently teaching, I don't think it fazed them much, and I didn't go into a lot of detail. Because I feel like it's just part of getting to know somebody. Like, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a lawyer, So, well, I'm a violin teacher. I'm a musician. Oh, that's interesting. And then we would just kind of move on. And I found that it was just interesting to be on the other side of the fence because I was really getting a lot of honest feedback from parents about how they felt. Certainly some of the pride that they felt and the excitement that they felt about their children's careers and things that were coming up for them. And also a lot of really honest talk about their anxieties and their concerns, their stresses. It was a really clear, honest window into what they were going through. And in the first month I was there, I had kind of a trigger to that because as a teacher, you hear some of those things and you think well, are you doing this though? Are you doing that? Or why are you feeling this way? And it's not that I was annoyed, but I was kind of baffled by it. And then I started feeling those same things because I also was sitting in the large concert hall at the conservatory in a seat, waiting for Ava to come out on stage and feeling like my heart was going to leap out of my chest. And I also was wondering if she'd had enough rehearsals with the pianist or if she needed an extra lesson or if her violin needed to be adjusted or if I had given her enough food that morning or, any number of things. So suddenly, within a few months, I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm one of them. I actually have the same feelings that they do. And now I get it. And I did get it before, but this is at a completely different level now because it's different when your own child is walking on stage, and to trust the teacher because I will never forget Ava's teacher saying to me, well, I think she could play Preludium and Allegro at 7. And I said, well, really? And he said, well, let's look at it. She can do this. She can do that. She's done this, this, this. These are all the things that are in the piece. I see no reason why she can't do it. I think we should go ahead and plan that. And she'll perform it in 6 to 8 weeks. And then we'll be able to compete on it. And I thought, I was full of anxiety because I know how hard that piece is and how young she was.
Yeah.
But then I thought, no, you know what you want the parents to do when you're teaching Amy Beth. So trust him. He knows, he can see her. He's not flavored by loving her so much that my heart just wants to burst.
Right.
So just let him do his job. And I said, okay. And that day when she came out on stage after, I think, 7 weeks on that piece, I've never been so nervous in my life. I've never had a concert that made me feel like that, even at my own concerts. And so it really illuminated these feelings that the parents are having. Because if I'm having them too, and I have all of the background that I do and all of the coping mechanisms that I know, I have so much education to help me get through those feelings. I can have a talk with myself, every time I have a panic about Ava, and I can comfort myself through that because I know how. I can say, well, of course you're feeling this way, but if you have another rehearsal, you'll probably feel better. Last week she had a rehearsal. She had 3 memory lapses in rehearsal. I did feel anxious afterwards. I felt a little panic. She's performing this weekend, and there she is with 3 memory lapses. And another parent without the background would maybe have had a panic attack. But I have the background. I was still having a panic attack, but I took myself home and I studied the score with her, and I formulated a practice plan, and I wrote it out on the schedule, and now she's fine. But not all parents have that.
Right. And so would you say this is why you started a podcast?
Yes. So,
yeah.
So
let's talk about that, because I think it's pretty genius, actually. I mean, to consider that there's all these parents out there who are in your shoes, but they don't have the luck. It's not luck, but the good fortune of being able to say, "Oh, I know the flip side of it."
Yes. And, initially I had, asked to meet with the parents at San Francisco Conservatory to talk to them. And I was granted that opportunity. And it was really wonderful to talk to them because it just validated what I thought was this need for, a class almost on how to educate the parents, which is exactly what I would love to do at some point. And, it didn't seem the right time for me to be teaching a class then at the conservatory, and I was brand new to everything. But I still had this information in my heart, and I still felt like it really needed to get out there. So I started talking to a couple of teachers that were relatively new to me because they're here in California. And one of them in particular was just saying to me, do a podcast, put the information out there in your own words, use your voice. People are listening to podcasts. They're in their car listening. They're getting kids from one thing to another. They're very busy, lots of errands, lots of activities. The kids are really scheduled up. So put it out there in your own voice and make it relatable so that they can understand that there's somebody rooting for them. And to be honest, she had to push me a little bit because it made me feel, again, vulnerable. Like, what am I really going to be putting out my words? I've written blogs, and I've had blogs featured on violinist.com, and I know they get spread around, but speaking is different. And, really giving some of my own, stories from when I was a kid or from when I was on stage as a young artist, putting that spin on things, that was going to be a different thing for me. And now being a studio parent and being able to relate at that level was very new. It took me probably 6 months to agree to, in my own heart, okay, I'm going to do it. And even then I had to figure out, as everybody does when they start a podcast, like, how does this even happen? Do I have the right equipment? There are all these obstacles that if you could very easily be like, what, this is too complicated. Yeah. This is not going to happen. Like, if anybody wants to talk to me, I'm available, but I can't be just, I have no idea what these platforms are. I could have just walked away, but I persisted. And then I started, and I think in large part because Ava has a large Instagram and lots of parents and students are on there. Mm-hmm. We have that community, which we've built, really organically. I think that it became popular because of that, almost right from the start. And, it's not to say that it's a huge podcast, but, we have over 6,000 downloads now, I think. And I feel like we're reaching people because I'm getting emails back and people are thanking me. And maybe more importantly, I feel as if I'm speaking my own truth, and that I'm doing what I think part of my, why I'm here is to educate and to make people feel as if great art can happen. And
That's
the
so
parents
great.
need that.
Yeah, it's such a great contribution. And, I'm thinking as you're talking about it, my husband teaches, he has a full violin studio, and the parents need to know about your podcast. So
Well,
I'm going to
I mean,
make sure I tell them about it.
I've been getting these emails from teachers saying that they're making listening to my podcast part of the requirement to enter their studio,
Wow.
that they want the parents to have that education first about what their role really is. And, my feeling was when I started it, that there's a lot of parent education for Suzuki parents. And I have been a Suzuki parent, and I've also been a Suzuki teacher, and I've been a Suzuki student. So I've had the full mix, right? And there's all this stuff out for Suzuki parents. It's so great. And there are all these communities, they're online, there's chat rooms, there's like groups on Facebook, there are books and books and books of information, workshops, summer festivals, you name it. But when the kids get out of the Suzuki method, or if they graduate early because they're kind of one of those driven types that just kind of blasts through and then is like, getting into pre-college at 7 or something, then the parents are in a whole new world. And,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of teachers that don't want the parents in on lessons at a certain point. And things escalate very quickly with the difficulty of the literature involved and the amount of time, the amount of investment, both financial, time-wise, to the whole family goes way up. And there isn't a whole lot of help there to help the parents figure out, well, what is my role now? Okay, now I'm not going in and side by side inside this Suzuki triangle, which is what they call it. Now I'm kind of on the, I'm sitting and I'm watching maybe, or maybe I'm right outside the door and I'm trying to do check-ins to make sure that they're practicing, but I've been kind of kicked out of the practice room too sometimes. So what can I do to help this go better or easier, or so that we're not, constantly anxious about the next thing that's coming? And I really wanted to fill that space with information and to give some coping skills, because I think, like anything, when we feel anxious, sometimes we make the wrong moves
Mm.
because we're operating from a place of fear. And I want to really empower parents to, have some things that they know are tried and true that can help them get through those feelings and actually serve their kids. And I don't think you know how to do that intuitively. That's something that needs to be passed on and educated.
Exactly. Well, okay, so your podcast is called Beyond the Triangle
Yes.
on iTunes and probably all the other podcast platforms.
Yes.
And so this is a really great resource for parents whose kids are really excelling. Would you say any string instrument
I'd say any
or any
instrument.
instrument?
I
Okay.
mean, I certainly speak like a string teacher, so I'm
Yeah.
giving examples that are very violin related or string related. But from what I'm hearing from parents, I think you could be, and I'm actually hearing from Suzuki parents too. So I've had some feedback, which is suggesting to me like you shouldn't market this just for people that are beyond the Suzuki method. It actually already exists inside. I get that, but I guess the reason that I put it the way that I did, beyond the triangle, was because I feel like there is a lack of resource at that level, at the
Mm-hmm.
pre-college level. And I think that the anxieties go way up at that level too, because this is when the kids start competing more, auditioning more, performing more, and the literature gets much more volatile. So they can practice everything correctly and still bomb it on stage. And that is a really hard thing for parents to deal with.
Right.
So it just becomes, there's like a mixed bag of things, which happens when your kid is playing literature at that virtuosic level. There are a lot more things involved to ensure consistency and make sure that they get, the validation that they deserve for all of their hard work, sacrifice, and commitment.
Right. So, besides listening to your podcast, what can teachers who are listening do to support the parents of the kids in their studio? in the way that you're describing? Like, if you could think of like one or two things that you really wish teachers would remember?
Well, I mean, I wish that teachers would be a little bit more clear about the trajectory for each piece that a kid is doing. So sometimes when I'm hearing, it's just one thing, but when I'm talking to parents, and especially recently, let's say a kid has started a piece that they're really, really excited about. And maybe it's 12 pages long. So maybe it's the first movement of a large concerto. I think that it gets very confusing for parents when they haven't done something that big before to understand that this might take the better part of a year. And
Okay.
so they're not really emotionally prepared for this long haul scenario.
Okay.
And they don't know um, that when they have their first rehearsal with piano, that the whole thing is probably going to fall apart, even though it sounded great yesterday, that extra stimulus of having another part against theirs is going to collapse it all.
Okay.
And that's okay. So there's just a lot of unknown territory, which I think once that starts hitting, I wish that teachers would be a little bit more articulate about, hey, we're going to start your first major concerto today, and this is what you can expect in terms of the time that it'll probably take, the commitment that I'll need from you. And these are some things that you can do to make it run a little bit easier. And then, when you do have that first rehearsal, to, not to say to them, well, this is likely going to be rocky, because you don't want to ever frame anything like that.
Right.
But to be supportive and vocal about, hey, this is actually pretty normal in the framework of normal for what happens in a first rehearsal. So let's see it get put back together again. And I just think that we know a lot as teachers, and there's a kind of a component that is hard for us to relay to the parents, but I think would offer them a lot of comfort when they're trying to build these larger pieces or large programs with a very talented younger kid.
Right.
And the other thing that I think that I would tell teachers, which might even be more important than what I just said, is I really wish that there was, inside of teacher training, an opportunity for teachers to do a lot of studying on child development and also just basic child psychology, because I think that it helps to understand, where a kid is in their typical child development, so that you can work with them during periods where that's popping up and kind of interrupting their training.
That's
So like
great
Ava's
advice.
Ava's arguing a lot right now, and in practice she's testing. Um, and she's a really good kid, and she's really very committed to violin. So if I didn't know better, I would think that she was, you know, not as committed because she's arguing.
Right.
But it's not about that. She's not talking back, but she's questioning things more, because that's the stage of child development that she's in. She's actually questioning all authority right now. She's trying to figure out what her own opinion is on things. So she's more interested in why you have that opinion rather than something else. Sometimes it seems like stalling in a lesson, but it's not. She's trying to figure out where she stands on things. And she's doing that not just in violin, but across the board. And a lot of teachers, not all teachers have children of their own,
Yeah.
but a lot of teachers are teaching children.
Well, and even
So,
if you have kids of your own, you might not know these things, you know? So
correct.
I just think what I love about what that you're saying is it's like a holistic teaching philosophy that encompasses both sides of the coin, the parenting side and the
Yes.
teaching of the child. Like that's so valuable as a
Yeah.
to I mean to find you as a teacher would be like a gold mine, because people
Oh,
probably
thanks.
don't, I mean seriously, because people probably don't realize, I mean, going in, you don't think, gee, I really, as a parent, I would think, because I haven't ever thought this, gee, I hope the teacher is going to understand how to support me in this situation. You don't think that
Hmm.
because you're just thinking about your child.
Yeah.
So, and then probably until it's too late and you're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in no man's land where I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know who to ask these questions or even what to ask. So I think
Yeah.
it's just really incredible. So, so you're teaching now.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I mean, I am teaching privately, and then also recently was placed on faculty for pre-college, which was a really beautiful development for our family and for me personally, because I have now spent a year and a half at the pre-college watching Ava thrive with their program, and it's a wonderful program. It has so much to offer young artists, and I see all of her training, not just in her private lessons, but in her musicianship and theory and harmony. It's peeking into all of her work. And I love the idea of working there because it gives me a lot of faith in their process, and also to mix my own process in there is just incredibly exciting to me. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of this. I was brought in the middle of the year, which is a little unusual, but I'm sure I'll have a few students in this year, and then hopefully build my studio slowly as we get into the next school year.
Exactly. And to the fact that you're bringing in all of just your wealth of knowledge about supporting parents, it's like you're bringing in a double whammy of really great stuff, I think. So it's
Well,
really
I hope so. It's a really exciting development, and I have to say that when you're teaching privately, I think some of the challenge lies in trying to get in a lot of information inside the lesson, because you know that you need to touch on music theory and harmony and ear training and all of these things, but you're also there to teach violin. And sometimes when I found myself in the middle of a violin lesson that I'm teaching, saying like, "Hey, I don't know whether you know this about Saint-Saëns, but he had a very tragic, life. And let me tell you why that is, and let me tell you how that relates to the piece that you're playing, which sounds like, everything is great and hopeful and wonderful, and why that's a miracle in my head." As I speak like that in a violin lesson, I feel the minutes ticking by sometimes. And I also sometimes feel the parents looking at me like, "Okay, let's get back to Martelet," or something. And I feel that pressure because I know that I have a lot that I need to get through. But at the conservatory, I know this because I've watched Ava. She now knows what a minor triad is. She knows what ABA form is. She knows what her key signatures are. She knows very basic, but still, rich histories of a lot of the major composers. So she's bringing that fabric of information into her training and into the way that she interprets things. And for me to know that there's this wonderful faculty there that's doing some of that legwork, that artistic, fabric of information is being relayed by other people. So I can, reinforce it or add to it, or I could just teach violin, which is really what I love to do the most, even though I've had to do kind of like the full spectrum when I was teaching privately out of my house. So, I mean, that's something that I'm really excited about, because I think it yields a different young artist to have all of that stuff going on, simultaneously.
yes, and the fact that it's being covered in other areas so you can focus strictly on violin is really
Yes,
freeing. That's great.
it is.
So
Yeah.
if people are listening and they have questions for you, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
They can write me at my studio email, which is hormonviolinstudio@gmail.com.
Okay.
And I'm happy to answer questions there. They can also write me at Beyond the Triangle Podcast at gmail.com. And I can also answer questions from that email.
Great. That's fabulous. So I'll have all this information in the show notes if you want to get to know Amy Beth a little bit better. And I mean, this has been so valuable to hear about your career, because this podcast is about careers. But then also I know so many musicians teach even when they didn't expect to teach, like
Yeah.
a lot of times they discover it, and they discover they love it. Like I know a lot of people who've gotten themselves to that point, and I think this is just adding another layer of what's possible. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Oh, I'm so happy to come on. And, I read something yesterday that I'll just add to the end of this session with you. I read something yesterday that was fascinating to me. It was basically speaking about how anybody who's a really avid performer, that they would benefit at some point from teaching in whatever capacity they could.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are traveling a lot, and so they can't teach, regular students. But I think teaching is such a valuable thing because, first of all, you're spreading information out, which is a beautiful process and one that yields, a lot of joy for people for years. But also, I think it teaches you about your process and how it kind of reinforces how you make things happen, how the building blocks of getting something to be cleaner or clearer or
Yep.
To have more musical intention, to be going over that and articulating it to not just one student, but to many students who have different temperaments, different personalities, different learning styles. It just strengthens what you know already in your own work and gives it more dimension. And I think it allows you to play more clearly from stage.
Yep.
So I think I read that and I thought, they're right, because it really has given so much to me as a performer. So I'm very grateful for it.
I completely agree. And I'll just add that I've learned so much about my own playing and about my own my own philosophy about teaching, because by just doing it, so having with the horn is completely different. And when you get students at the beginning, a lot of times they're just guessing where the note is because the horn is so mysterious.
Yeah.
And so if you can either keep teaching in that way that they just keep guessing forever until they finally figure it out, or you come up with a way to help them to not have to do that. And I think that's really good for students and also for your own playing, like it for sure was for me. So
yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to tell everyone to listen to your podcast who has...
Thank you, Tracy.
It's definitely extremely valuable. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Awesome.